Well, you have to answer the first question.
Thank you for the nice Qigong practice. Curious to how it was added to that format of Abhayagiri Monastery. In 2004, during the winter retreat, Longpo Basano taught Qigong to us, and I just kept doing it, so that's how it started. It was never added to the format per se, but it was added to the format of the Thanksgiving retreats.
Yeah, we've always tried to have some sort of activity related to movement of the body for the Thanksgiving retreat. Some years it's been yoga, other years various kinds of movement dynamics depending on who's available to offer them, and then most recently Ajahn Qigong sessions. While practicing walking meditation, I feel an earth element component. Thoughts? Yeah, it's great. It's my thought. Yeah, I mean, it's contemplation of the four elements while you're standing, sitting, walking, lying down. It's a totally legitimate and useful contemplation. And if you're feeling the qualities of the earth element like solidity and density and weight and gravity as you're moving through space, then that's an excellent contemplation. And it can also be, alternated with contemplations of the other four material elements, if you wish, and then also even adding space and consciousness to the element contemplation if you want to. So it's it's whether you're doing walking or sitting or whatever form, whatever posture, the elements contemplation is a really good one for staying grounded in the body, kind of disentangling ourselves from all the perceptions and opinions and judgments we have about the body, just staying with the elemental quality of it, if you will. And the earth element is a particularly good one to help us stay grounded if we're somebody who gets kind of easily distracted or lost in the mental realm. What does a monk do if they've intentionally broken a precept and now regret it? Well, actually, we have every 2 weeks at the monastery, in our tradition, there's what's called the recitation of the Patimokkha, or the monk's rules of training, 227 rules, basic 227, probably about 2,000 or 3,000 not minor rules, but derivations and minor rules. But we recite the 227, and before we do that, part of the requirement is to have what's called a pure assembly. Pure meaning that if there have been any precepts that have been broken, that they need to be confessed. So the monks pair up one-on-one with another monk just before the recitation happens, and if there's been any offenses of any kind, then it's mentioned to the other monk and acknowledged, and then you go through just a little recitation that clears one essentially of the offense, or just confessing it actually clears you of the offense. So, and you don't have to wait if you want to get it off your chest before the every 2 weeks Patimokkha recitation, then you can find another monk and do a confession with them right then and there, discuss it if it needs to be discussed, and then move on from there. So it's a really useful format, and we've actually, for people, lay practitioners who are sincere upasakas and maybe have someone that they've been practicing with or trust, to actually incorporate that kind of routine into their own life too, so that if they've broken a precept, they can give that other person a call or meet with them in person or do a video conference or whatever, and just talk about it as kind of a confession. So, yeah, it's a good thing to do. Getting it out there, it makes it so that it's kind of not a secret. That's the whole thing. Is at the monastery, we really try to emphasize kind of being transparent. Transparency is very, very useful. Dear Ajahn, how do you decide which suttas to read? Do you read them front to back? What about the commentaries? How much time do you spend studying the suttas? Thank you. Well, I can speak just for myself, and also a little more broadly, generally, that actually different monks in our tradition have different interest in the suttas, some quite a bit, some just a little. The encouragement is to become familiar enough with the teachings of the Buddha, the formal teachings in the suttas and in also the various writings of current day Ajahns, to really have a good sense of what the teachings are all about. And the suttas are a rich source of that. It's particularly now that we've got in the past 20, 25 years, much better translations than we had before into English. So it really varies, although there's encouragement to, as I said, to do at least some study and familiarization with the teachings in that way. I sort of fall probably somewhere in between. I have an interest in them, but I don't have a scholarly interest in them. I try and read them for the purpose of informing my contemplative practice and my understanding, of course, of the teachings and the goal and the various steps along the way. But I don't have such a keen interest in really delving into all the details and comparing and contrasting and discussing and that kind of thing. So I sort of probably fall somewhere around in the middle of the pack. I have read most of the Nikayas front to back, not completely. I don't think I made it through the Anguttaras front to back. And I think I came close to the Samyutta, but maybe didn't complete it. But all the Digha and the Majjhima, Udana, Itivuttaka I've read front to back. I don't do that much now anymore, now that I've done it a few times, and just kind of periodically delve into them. Sometimes you get into a thought train and kind of research and go from one sutta that's related to another sutta to another one, and until I have enough. So I kind of do it more piecemeal now, but it's still a regular part of my practice. Commentaries, not so much interest in that. I've read some of the Visuddhimagga. I find it's a bit too abstract for me. And, some of the teachings are quite useful and quite helpful. I find the commentaries can be informative, particularly in the study of Vinaya, fleshing out some of the shadowy spots, the unclear spots of the discipline. Sometimes they're useful in helping to explain some of the more gray areas in the suttas, but generally speaking, the more time goes along, the less I find myself interested in them, to be honest. Just because there's so many much better translations of the suttas now, and also some really good, scholarly treatises on various aspects of the suttas that modern day meditation practitioners and scholars I just find that the suttas are becoming much more accessible and much more alive, so I tend to spend most of my time there rather than looking at the commentaries. Again, that varies, from monk to monk. Hi, Ajahn. I was wondering how to differentiate between samatha and samadhi meditative states. In some of the sits, I'm experiencing a pleasant stillness, and occasionally the attention fully settles on the breath. But are there signs of harmful, unwholesome states of concentration? Okay. Yeah, kind of a bit of a explanation, useful because the words samatha and samadhi, samatha, vipassana, and samadhi have a lot of different ways that people use them, sometimes a bit contradictory and sometimes just not so clear. Oftentimes you'll see samatha and samadhi almost conflated as the same thing. Samatha often translated as calm, settling, kind of contemplative practice, reflections that calm and settle the mind, essentially, as one could say, that's samatha practice. Samadhi is sometimes, said to be kind of the same thing, but often translated as concentration. Vipassana, insight, sometimes is referred to as an actual meditation technique. The Buddha used the word vipassana in the suttas more as as just that, insight. It's more of a step along the way, a result of different kinds of reflections, rather than a meditation technique. Mindfulness gets pushed in there too, so that some of the more popular teachings earlier, as they came into the West, would say that you practice samatha to develop samadhi, and you practice mindfulness to develop vipassana or insight. My understanding over the years has kind of moved in a slightly different direction from some of the teachers like Ajahn Tanisro, Ajahn Jeff. I think, and it was one of the more early ones who kind of shifted the paradigm a bit, in that we practice with the four foundations of mindfulness, right? The satipatthana. And that's our basic kind of contemplative practice, our structure that we use. There's many contemplations within the four satipatthana, as you probably know by now. So that's our basic structure for contemplations. That's what we call right mindfulness, sammasati, is contemplating along any of those lines that's described in the four satipatthana. And then within all of those contemplations, whether it's body, feelings, mind, dhammas, mind objects, or dhammas better, sets of dhamma teachings, within all of those contemplations, one can develop both samatha and vipassana. And you can see that in the structure of the satipatthana if you're familiar with the way that it talks about different contemplations that will result in that kind of stilling and settling of the mind. And then at the end of every single one of them is a refrain that refers more to insight, the development of insight within that same reference point, say like of the body. So you're with using the mindfulness practice properly, sammasati, you are developing both calm and insight. And they go hand in hand, just as like, I think it was Ajahn Sudhira was saying in his talk, it's like picking up, it's like two ends of the same stick. You pick up the stick and you pick up both of them. Sometimes there's more of an emphasis on one than the other. But the Buddha's instructions always were, if you're strong with developing calm, but not so strong with reflection and insight, then find a teacher who is good with reflection and insight and get them to help you develop that, and vice versa. So he's always encouraging a balance, no matter which one seems to be leading the way for any particular person. And then when samatha and vipassana start to come together and start to unify in the experience of the mind that's both settled and also reflective around aspects of the Dhamma, particularly, the characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, then the mind starts to, they feed back on each other and settle, and the mind starts to coalesce and compose itself and stop wandering around so much. And when that becomes very, very steady, very solid, very continuous, no matter what the meditation theme is, then the mind is saying, then you're saying the mind is starting to gather into samadhi, or collectedness, the firm foundation of the mind, the firm establishing of the mind, the unwavering quality that finds itself just quite contented with the theme that one is developing. And then the insight and the tranquility, or the insight and the settledness start to reinforce each other back and forth, pulling you deeper into that samadhi kind of state. And then samadhi is the state of mind that's open and clear and malleable, for really even deeper insight. One can, in terms of miccha samadhi, not sama samadhi being right concentration or right composure, let's say, better. I don't like concentration so much as I think Ajahn Yaniko mentioned. It tends to be kind of pinched and intense and limited in terms of a translation. So maybe, but as opposed to sama samadhi, there's miccha samadhi, which is where somebody can become quite narrowly focused and absorbed in essentially what may be a distraction or even an unwholesome state of mind, an unwholesome quality, that kind of narrow, super focused, super intense single pointedness on an object that's not actually particularly skillful, or maybe is just too limited and not inclusive. And the mind can become very single-pointed, but not around a very useful object or a very wholesome object. One of my favorite sayings attributed to Ajahn Thanissaro, Ajahn Jeff, was, if you develop concentration in a mind that's filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, what you get is concentrated greed, hatred, and delusion. So, let that be a cautionary tale in terms of absorbing deeply into a state that may not be based in wholesome qualities. Sama samadhi also always has right mindfulness and clear comprehension as its basis. So it's always around, sama samadhi is always going to be around some sort of theme that the Buddha recommends for developing the path, and it's not going to be super exclusive. It will be exclusive to some extent of unwholesome mind states. You can say it's exclusive in that way, kind of trying to abandon unwholesome mind states, but it's not necessarily, and oftentimes not very usefully, centered around a narrow point of anatomy, and with the exclusion of all other experience. Dear Venerable, did the Buddha speak of chakras? Sometimes during my practice, my attention seems to be pulled to in between my eyes like a magnet. I don't think much of it. I don't know about chakras, but I am curious. Gracias. He didn't really speak so much of chakras. The Buddha didn't really get a lot into the various energy systems of the bodies, although they were obviously quite part of the culture at the time that he was in India. There would be some different kinds of references to energy in the body, energy states, that kind of a thing. But he didn't really go into a lot of development of descriptions of and meditations around and how to channel energy through the various chakras, or how to treat various illnesses related to them. I think one can only speculate, of course, but that he wanted to consolidate his teachings around basically suffering and the end of suffering, which although involves very, very important contemplations with the body, not so much in an analytical way, but more in a way that informs us as to what is the true nature of this body, and how is it that we cling to it, and how can we let go of it. Realizing the illness and imbalance happens, and that certain treatments and therapies would be acceptable for his disciples to use, but he didn't really get into prescribing in a lot of detail, a lot of attention around physical health and well-being, talking about the energy centers of the body. Doesn't mean it's incorrect to do that, but it wasn't an emphasis in his teaching. Dear Venerable Sirs, Today, while eating breakfast, I had an image of enchiladas come to mind. So to my surprise, when that's what we ended up being served, I wondered if it was a coincidence. Has this ever happened to you? Also, can we do another group hike? I do not like to go too deep into the woods because of the bears. Thank you for everything. You all are an inspiration. I don't know if we're going to be able to squeeze in another group hike, seeing that it is all winding up tomorrow. So you might have to face the fear. Well, I'll let Ajahn Yaniko ponder this for the next few minutes and decide. It's in the pondering position right now, and we will. Okay, it's on. As for enchiladas, there's a layer in the heavenly realms, a rebirth in the heavenly realms of a particular sort of deva, one of the higher realms, but still within the realm of sensuality, I think. It's one of the sense-desire realms still. Above the human realm, but not as high as, say, the highest Brahma realms, or even higher than that. And it's basically the realm of the devas, or the celestial beings who delight in creating. And they can just merely think of something and it will appear. So maybe you had a recent rebirth from that realm and just happened to visualize enchiladas and make them appear. Thank you for doing that. But seriously, who knows? Coincidence maybe, who knows? Maybe you kind of tapped into a moment of an idea from one of the cook's minds or the menu plan, and it's in some sort of strange little mind stream connection. Could be. Could be just a coincidence. Who knows? One of those imponderables. Those things do happen, though. I mean, I grew up very close to my sister, and we pretty much throughout most of our life have often found ourselves saying the same thing to each other at the same time. So it's sort of like there's this kind of resonance that sometimes happens between people or with events. So I've never manifested enchiladas, though. Dear Ajahn, thank you very much for the teaching for the past week. One last question from me. Any advice on how to stick with the plan or push myself when I don't have the motivation? I thought I was just burnt out, but taking some breaks has not really helped. I really need to develop and maintain this motivation in order to pursue my career, a right livelihood, at least the direction I am working towards. Thank you. Yeah, motivation over the long haul is a challenge. And you just have to be incredibly clever, in terms of what it is that you think about and where you put your energy to try and motivate yourself to continue paying attention to the practice and not getting lost in the ways of the world, even if it's skillful right livelihood. Making that commitment to practice the Dhamma as the center of your life, and then you structure the rest of the world around it. Oftentimes at the end of retreats, you get to talk about, how do I incorporate practice into my daily life, and we often, encourage people to rephrase that and how to incorporate daily life into your practice. So that you make practice the center and you structure your life around it. Maintaining that motivation, different people have different ways of doing that. I have to admit that, it's not such a popular way that people would have, in the world of motivating themselves to practice, but, I find that the reflection And the working hypothesis of karma and rebirth is very useful. That the reflection that I have been revolving through samsara based on my karma, based on my actions and intentions, from a during a without a conceivable beginning, without a conceivable beginning. Sometimes they say since beginningless time, but from an inconceivable beginning. And that I will continue to do so if I don't take advantage of the teachings of the Buddha. And, sometimes, well, what's so bad about that? Life's pretty good, so if I keep on being reborn, it's not so bad. But we don't really know the seeds that we've planted in the past. We don't really have much of a say over how karma manifests and the form of rebirth that we will be taking, and what our circumstances, even if we are fortunate enough to have another human rebirth, we don't know what circumstances we'll be born into, whether we'll have access to the Dhamma again for years, eons, who knows how many lifetimes before we might actually come into contact with the Dhamma again. It's a very, 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 very rare and fortunate occurrence over the span of time to be born in a time when the Buddha's teachings are still alive and genuine, and to be having all the faculties and requisites, including access to the teachings. It's an incredibly rare combination if you expand your mind to cover more than just this one lifetime. So reflecting on that, okay, right, who knows where, what'll happen, what my next rebirth would be like if I don't stick with this path. And so I do that. I think about that, and I think, reflect on death. I'm 68 now. There's not much time left. And even if you're 28, there's really not much time left. You kind of think there is, maybe, but if you're smart, you look at somebody like myself and you realize, that was just 40 years ago, and I went through that period of 40 years incredibly fast, and so will you. So to reflect on aging, reflect on death, reflect on the very fortunate, extremely fortunate nature of this opportunity that you've been given, and ask yourself, why do I think about wasting my time? I can still do a few good things in the world, but if I don't keep this commitment to realizing the end of suffering, then I could easily get lost again for another 10,000 eons. So, yeah, got to do it if you want to see an end to it. And also taking, on the positive side, taking note of, particularly if you're somebody who feels inclined to be, of service or of use or of help to other people, which I think, many of us here, most of us here probably would incline to, that the best way you can help other people is to get your act together so that you can act as a clear resource for others. Because if you try and help people from a kind of a self-deluded, self-referential state of mind, then it's not going to be nearly as helpful as if you're able to come from a clear understanding of the teachings. Sankitena pachupadana kanda dukkha, 5 focuses of identity. Is this the same as the 5 hindrances? No. The 5 focuses of identity, as we do in the morning chanting, as it kind of further fleshes out after that particular line, it refers to the 5 aggregates as affected by clinging. That's what Panchupadana Kanda refers to. The 5 clinging aggregates, Upadanas in there, Kanda and Pancha. Pancha is 5. So the five khandas are variously described as affected by clinging or not affected by clinging. We have these five khandas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, as generally what we refer to as who we are, identity view. And when they're accompanied by clinging, then we have the five aggregates affected by clinging, which is what they are most of the time. When we start to let go of our identification with those five khandas, then they can gradually become more experienced as just the five khandas, just as they are, without any personal identification with them. So that's the five focuses, or the five khandas, the five heaps around which we establish some sort of identity. The five hindrances tend to refer more to various manifestations of those underlying tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion. So those are aspects of how we, the bubbling up of those underlying tendencies and the manifestation of them in the forms of sense desire, ill will, sloth, torpor, restlessness, and doubt. Manifestations of those underlying tendencies that obstruct our clear seeing. So we have to overcome the five hindrances to have a clear enough state of mind to be able to see deeply when we're clinging to the five khandas and to let go. Ajahn Yaniko said yesterday that the definition of chitta was controversial. Could you please explain? Well, it's controversial. It's an interesting thing that if you read the suttas, there's actually nowhere that I'm aware of anyway. This was something that Ajahn Jeff mentioned once in a tea time discussion a long time ago. That nowhere in the actual Sutta Pitaka is chitta defined. It's only, we only come to an understanding of it, of how the word is used through inference, of how it's used in various contexts in the teachings. So I can't point, nobody can point to a place that says, okay, you know, in this sutta number so-and-so is where chitta is defined. So, you know, over the years, because of that, of course, there's lots of interpretations and descriptions and definitions and explanations and controversies about what the term refers to. Human beings being human beings, you know, with our views and our opinions. So, you know, I have my own take on how I reference it, you know, because it's often translated as mind, which is confusing in the English language because the word manas is also translated as mind. So we've got two different minds, you know, two different ways that mind is being used. And it's really hard to go into all the different ways that people might interpret it in a short Q&A kind of a thing, but I think the best simple, probably oversimplified, this is a warning and a kind of a disclosure, so kind of a take it with a grain of salt in some ways, but is that but the best kind of operating way that I hold that word is describing a process of kind of receptive cognition. It's not a thing. Chitta's not a thing. It's an activity in a sense. But the base quality, and this is from Ajahn Sucitto, the base quality of this cognizing process is awareness. So when the chitta is, when that awareness, that cognizing process is filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, then that becomes the flavor, the cast of the chitta. It takes on the color of the defilement that is being attended to, attached to, clung to, wrapped up in. And it sort of takes on that color, that form, that presence. And when that disappears, then the chitta doesn't have that particular form, color, feeling to it. and on and on and on and on with all the various things that we can put our attention onto and hold on to, cling to. Moods, feelings, beliefs, all those kinds of things. It takes on that kind of affective quality. In the Satipatthana, descriptions of chitta, what's the mind like? What is the chitta like? Is it constricted or is it expanded? Is it filled with desire or is it empty of desire? Is it filled with aversion or is it empty of diversion? Is it filled with confusion or is it empty of confusion? So you can kind of get a little bit of a hint about what happens within the experience of the chitta. Chitta is also that which can be liberated. That process, that knowing process, when it's completely free from the underlying tendencies, the underlying defilements towards greed, hatred, and delusion, then that's what we call liberation. The intellect, the mind, that part of the five condas, personality, of the six sense bases that helps to abstract and conceptualize, that's not something that's liberated in a sense, that process. But chitta is that quality of cognition with awareness as its base that has the potential for liberation. So you ask somebody else, you'll get a different story.
I think that's probably the closest you get to a sutta definition is the chitta anupassana, the third stage of satipatthana.
Yeah.
One of the closest.
Yeah, take a look at that if you want to get a few more descriptors of looking at that process. Okay, we've got the countdown here. 4 more questions. How could this practice fit with what we do in this tradition? And there's 4 points, which I guess is this practice, and how does it fit into this tradition? Point 1, leave the past and the future behind, just be. 2, experience awareness. 3, stay with awareness. 4, there's 5 of them. 4, don't get pulled in by the mind, etc. Leave it alone. Pulled in by the mind. Be aware of awareness. Thank you for pondering this. Well, it's true, a good contemplation of past and future. The past is just a memory. The future is unknown. Now is the knowing. That's an Ajahn Sumedho quote. So I think that answers the question of past and future. Just be. I would say just know. Ajahn Chah would say being anything is suffering. Experience awareness. Stay with awareness. Be aware of awareness. It's all just kind of words. The same thing is basically just knowing that quality of the knowing mind without introducing a self-reference to it. And not getting involved with the object of the awareness so much. Don't make it into anything. Can you please advise on how to deal with feelings of guilt, shame, and inadequacy? Thank you. And I saw this one also similarly phrased. How do I overcome inferiority, insecurities, and ill will? Okay. Guilt and shame. I think it was somebody posing this question to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or it was some great master describing, how do I deal with things like guilt. And this was some time ago that I remember hearing about this. And the translator had to kind of spend some time explaining this.
Translating for Lumpur Panyananda.
Oh, okay, was that it? Okay, thank you. Lumpur Pasano translating for Lumpur Panyananda. And had to explain some, this thing because it was an unfamiliar concept to him, coming from an Asian culture. That the idea of blaming yourself over and over and over again, and kind of hitting upon yourself, and kind of really going into that kind of mental state is generally not something, at least in times past, before Westernization hit Asian countries, something that was not really familiar. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Ajahn Reneko, but I think that finally after Ajahn Lungpor Pasano was able to explain the phenomena to Lungpor Panyanando, the response was something like, "Oh, that's not good. Don't do that." So, just be aware that it's one of those layers that we've added to the mix of dukkha that we don't need to do. It's there's a healthy kind of shame, hiri and ottappa. You may have heard those terms. Sometimes translated as shame and fear of wrongdoing, which is kind of like a pretty loaded translation because those are qualities that are encouraged for us to develop. They don't translate so well into English, but more like the shame part of it is sort of like a healthy sense of shame, like having a conscience, so that when you've done something that's unskillful or harmful, there's a feeling, there's a resonance of like, oh, shrinking away, oh my gosh, that sense of regret, healthy regret, because there was something unskillful. But it doesn't kind of flower into turning it against oneself over and over again in a way that only Westerners can do so well. Particularly if we've been brought up, in some of the more traditional religions, that we are the original sin, the source of all bad, because of our impurity. And then we kind of grow up with that and get it drummed into us and replay it over and over again. But it's useful to reflect of, like, do we really want to add that layer of harmfulness to our psyche? Would we do that to other people who are experiencing the same thing? Why would we do it to ourselves if we wouldn't do it to other people? It's sort of like kind of trying to, in a way, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but it's a very strong sense of self, a strong sense of me, that what I did was so bad that I must be an awful person and I must be punished for it, or at least I will keep blaming myself over and over again in hopes that my blaming myself and recognizing what a horrible person I am will make it somehow better. Doesn't work. So sometimes you just kind of have to painfully learn that by doing it too much, until you kind of develop a sense of kindness. And kindness, true metta, is not personalized. It's not towards any one individual per se, in its most fully developed sense. And so the reflection that we have on metta is, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading my heart with loving kindness. So, it's a tough one. It's kind of ingrained in us, but it is an artificial addition, and through reflection on how painful that is, and how we don't want to have pain, and realizing that if you don't accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to suffer a lot, because we all make mistakes. We will always continue to make mistakes. And we, might as well get used to it and just say, oh, okay, that's part of being a human, in the human condition. And it might sound kind of a bit glib or harsh, but it's true. It's just like, wow, just as I would wish someone else to be free from this kind of judgment, I wish myself to be free from this. I can just sort of see this with a big open heart. It's just another habitual tendency that with time and patience and expansiveness I can also, let go of that tendency to do that. And you make a mistake, okay, you acknowledge it, and in the best of worlds, you learn from it, and then you go on. And keep practicing loving kindness. Keep practicing that. Same for inferiority, insecurities, ill will. These are all conditions that, come from who knows how long ago, conditioned into us. Family, society, and, it's the work we're doing, essentially. It's all the work we're doing. Okay, we've gone 5 minutes over, but there's only one question left. You can bear with it. One more question. I've been getting intense piti during anapanasati, sometimes increasing with each in-breath as if fanning a fire, a la Ajahn Sudhiro. My aim is to make this coalesce into piti sukha so I can pursue vipassana. Any suggestions? Well, there's different approaches to it. One is to just make clear or, examine for yourself to make sure that the sort of contemplative practice you're doing, the breathing, is also strongly influenced with mindfulness and clear comprehension and a full, clear knowing of what you're doing rather than an intensely narrow, fixated kind of concentration. Because you can get a lot of piti from being really fixated without very much sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear comprehension. So just to examine yourself in your practice and see, is this true? Do I have a clear all-around sense of this whole body, along with wherever I'm, primarily noticing the breathing, whether it's, on a single point or whether it's a more broad energetic experience? Is there still this overall clarity, alertness, comprehension of the theme of the body? Because as someone mentioned before, even all through the fourth jhana, these are very embodied kinds of experiences, not just mind-only experiences. Generally speaking, as it's taught, piti, if there's clear comprehension, clear reflection, clear understanding of these sensations, pleasurable sensations that are arising, generally, as one experiences them, one realizes that they're a bit agitating, really, when it comes right down to it. If it's that intense, it can be a bit agitating to the peaceful heart. And there's a natural inclination to let that settle into more of an overall peaceful, embodied sense of sukha, or pleasure, contentment, which is, much more easeful and settled and not so exciting in a sense, because even something that's pleasurable and exciting is distracting to the truly peaceful heart. So generally, it just through reflection and clear understanding, it often will just morph into more of a settled feeling of overall sukha. And the vipassana aspect of it goes hand in hand. You can realize that as the focus of attention shifts or as the mind settles, then right there is your opportunity to kind of understand the fact that all of these states of mind that are conditioned are transient. And that once the causes and conditions for however they have come to arise pass on or change or kind of morph into something else, that's all part of the conditioned realm. And even the most heightened pleasure or the most difficult pain is all part of that process of change. So vipassana works its way into it if you just keep alert to that sense of anicca and not self, that these are all put into play by causes and conditions that don't really have anything to do with an ongoing me or self. Okay, that's it for questions for this retreat. Sadhu. No, I enjoy the questions myself.